And the reason that I'm doing this, or I've decided actually to take up this chat, is because I hear a lot from people saying, talking about how uh, our food has evolved and how we're at this great stage in dining and eating out, and how we have such a large variety of food available to us, a large variety of ingredients. We're actually spoiled for choice when it comes to all varieties of food. And in a sense, that is true, because we now have access to a lot more international ingredients that we didn't have before. But the flip side of it, what we don't realize and what we don't understand, is that uh, if you look at the varieties of uh, grains or lentils, okay, so that we had earlier, that is completely missing out. And we actually, in the choices that we have today in terms of, hey, Ruchi.
Hi.
Hi.
I really apologize, Antoine. It's some last minute technical issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I'm
know, I
on.
know.
Yeah.
Well, good, good. So, let me just quickly introduce Ruchi. She's an entrepreneur. She's been an an environmentalist who has studied MSc Environment and Change and Management from Oxford University, and she's worked in the World Bank on a project of access to energy. And she's also been a consultant with the European Academy of the Sciences. And Taru Naturals, the company that she has founded, is an organic fair trade food brand which focuses on sourcing and creating a market for organically grown foods from 10,000 identified tribal and small scale farmer networks across India. So, sorry for that very rushed and hurried intro, but I just wanted to jump straight in,
Yeah.
Ruchi. But yes, as I was explaining to people just before you started, I mean, the reason that I wanted to have this conversation is because I believe that unlike what people talk about, how we have a lot of diversity and we have a lot of choice, the fact of the matter is that we're actually seeing far fewer grains, far fewer vegetables, far fewer fruits being cultivated than before. It's only the commercial varieties, the varieties that are easy to transport, that are easy to stock, that are more popular, and the ones that have a different lot of other properties are actually good for us in different kinds of ways. Those are ones that we're missing out on. So, can you tell us some of the vegetables and fruits that were cultivated earlier and that have more or less disappeared from the market?
So, thank you so much, Anton, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And again, apologies for the technical issue. So if you go to see with Taru Naturals, we deal with a lot of wheat varieties, rice varieties, and even pulses varieties. And if you go back to historically, if you look at before the Green Revolution, India was literally a rice bowl of the world, right? For
Right.
example, we had before Green Revolution, we had 1 lakh varieties of rice, and
One
today
lakh.
it's yeah, literally 1 lakh varieties of rice. And now we've come down to almost 10,000 varieties of rice. And these are all indigenous, heirloom, cross-pollinated varieties. And it was the best part about this was there were like region-specific rices. So I'll give you an example. In Odisha, in Koraput, it's one of the most well-known areas for rice, right? There itself, you would find around 1,700 varieties of rice in that one specific region.
Wow.
It's actually mind blowing, right? And
Yeah.
only now, yeah, and only now that like the government has started working in that area to revive and sort of safeguard the rice varieties. Chhattisgarh, where we also work in Chhattisgarh. So Bastar is very, very well known for its red rice varieties. Now, if you look at the red rice varieties itself, there
Hmm.
are so many of them in Bastar itself. So each area of India has had different specific varieties of rice.
Hmm.
And And also growing practices have been different across India for different heirloom grains. So the other thing is there has been importance of medical ailments connected to rice. So Raktashali rice is really rich in hemoglobin, for example, and now people have come to know about it.
Okay.
I mean, it's really rich in iron, not hemoglobin, which means it's really good for the hemoglobin. Yeah. So people have just started waking up to the fact that, you know, all these different rice varieties are very rich in, say, specific one thing. Like we have the golden rice, which, by the way, there in Bangladesh, it's also called as, they have a BT version of golden rice, but the golden rice version in India is very rich in different other minerals. And again, you find that in Chhattisgarh. So that's with the rice varieties. Then we have millet varieties, right? So millets as well are very region specific for a reason, because with the geographical areas all across India, there is the difference in water and also the climate and also growing practices. So there's a reason why bajra is eaten so much in Rajasthan, because it requires very little water to be grown. Then again, jowar is eaten a lot in Maharashtra. But in jowar itself, there are many varieties of jowar, you know. So even in ragi, like you'll find around 40-50 varieties of ragi. So again, region specific desi varieties of millets. Even with foxtail, barnyard, and brown top millet, which people don't even touch these days. So that comes with the millets, and then the wheat. So wheat is a really big scam, I would say, because because especially after the Green Revolution, we started eating a lot of the bread wheat, right? And yeah, so this whole gluten issue with people is mainly because of the bread wheat, which started after the Green Revolution. And the hybridization of wheat means that the gluten level was high, but the mineral content of the wheat has gone down, the nutritional level. So you have wheat varieties like Sona Moti, Pegambari, and all these small grain wheat varieties, right? Those are really rich in, some of them are very rich in folic acid. Now, who would have thought that wheat can be rich in folic acid, for example, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's and it's basically the emmer wheat family. Now everybody says this is emmer wheat, that is emmer wheat. Actually, emmer wheat is a family. It's a family. Yeah. So in emmer wheat itself, you'll have many varieties of emmer wheat. Yeah. So it's very important to have desi wheat because it won't harm the body, and also there was a reason why India primarily ate flat bread, because after the Green Revolution, the entire industrialization of food started, wherein they started making bread also very soft, just for the palate, and that was suited for the bread wheat.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Ruchi, you've talked about many things. Let me just start out with one thing, and let me ask you to explain what is Emmer's wheat actually, because I don't think everyone is familiar with that. Emmer's wheat, or kapli atta as it is called, is something that is now kind of becoming more popular. So tell us why it's suddenly a rage.
So kapli, again, at Taru Naturals, what we did was we tested around 12 to 13 varieties of kapli. And kapli wheat, we got it from different parts of India. So we got it from, we received it from Maharashtra, from Udaipur, you know, from the south. So several areas we received kapli. And the main underlying thing is that out of the 12 and 13, only one variety actually tested less than 1% gluten. So it's medically said that you should have wheat which has gluten which is less, because because for diabetics and you know, different for heart patients or even cancer patients, they can't have too much sugar in it, right? And they can't have too much gluten, even for celiac disease people. So that's why kapli has really picked up, because the original desi variety of kapli has gluten level less than 1%. But given that even Sona Moti, even Pegambari is equally medically therapeutic as a wheat variety and is good to eat. You know, there's no problem to eat any of these wheats. And also with kapli, there's a lot of hybrid wheat varieties. So you will find in the market, there's a lot of spurious khapli wheat. So it's very important to see if there is a test which has been done by the company, because otherwise, people sell anything in the name of khapli. And in fact, we found 2 varieties of hybrids when we tested khapli. And Dharwad University has actually released hybrid varieties of khapli wheat. So it's it's a little, it gets a little bit scientific and technical, but we have to, those who have the knowledge, I think this is a really good platform, Anton, to actually spread awareness. Thank you for inviting me.
No, not at all. My pleasure. And actually, someone's asking, does khapli have a different name? I mean, I know in English it's Emers, but is there any other Indian name for it?
No, khapli is, again, it's a genus. It's just an overarching name for emmer wheat. And emmer wheat is one of the most ancient varieties of wheat. See, wheat is a grass at the end, right?
Right.
And something which was originally, it originally came from, there are studies which say that Punjab has some of the most ancient varieties of wheat, but Punjab was at that time a very big part of, India, and it also went up to, say, Afghanistan and those areas historically. So we actually don't know whether wheat actually came from Central Asia or which part. I think not enough historical evidence is there so far. I would say. Yeah, and considering it's a grass, just because there's no archaeological evidence, we can't say, where it actually originated. But of course, history says it came from Central Asia, but I highly refute. It depends.
So why are these farmers, I mean, the people that you source it from, why are they still growing it when, there's obviously no market for it, or there's a very small market for it until very recently?
So, when you look at the older generation of farmers, it's very precious, and it's also a very beautiful process, because you have an entire seed exchange network across the country, which is not part of any formal structure, which is not part of any government body, or they're not even registered. I mean, of course, you have the Plant Variety Act as part of it. You have the farmers who come up with improved varieties of, say, wheat or any other variety, and they register themselves, and they get sort of they get recognized. But if you go to see, there's a lot of applications of even farmers which are pending with the government. So the incentive here would be, I think, especially when I've seen and met seed saving farmers, is just that they want to pass it on to the future generations. And also it's the expertise. It's a very, they actually, a lot of the farmers we work with, they guard their seed banks with, as if they were their children, and they have, and they have really amazing ways of keeping their seeds alive. So again, I'm talking about Chhattisgarh because it's a very ancient land. So in one of the villages we went near Bilaspur, they have kind of a kund, a place, what is a kund? It's a
granary.
A granary kind of a thing. But they have kept their seeds in that, and then they have put gobar, lime, and cow urine. They've sort of put a lape around it, like a slurry on it, and outside and inside, to sort of safeguard it. And also in most of the temples, right, in the like black rice in Tamil Nadu, it's also mentioned in the Tamil Sangam text. Like, it's a very ancient mother variety of rice, so ancient that it's actually mentioned in the text. And so I happened to meet a really old farmer, a Tamilian farmer, when I was in Bangalore once. And what he said is, he found black rice seeds when he was small. His elders found it in the kalash, the pot of the foundation of the temple. And they have no clue when the black rice seeds came. Like, of course, there's no carbon dating there, but just imagine the seeds were intact in the pot in the foundation of the temple, because it's a sacred ritual, right? That you put seeds in the foundation of the temple because it's as sacred as the god. So you have some beautiful practices around this.
And are these the native black rices, or I mean, are they connected with the black rice from Nagaland? I mean, from the northeast, or a completely separate variety?
Yes, and this is originated. This is an original one from Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
Like it's a native variety from Tamil Nadu. I'll send you a film about this later.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, I mean, what happened? I mean, why did we lose out on this? Was it just the Industrial Revolution, or was it other factors as well?
So I think I can tell you a little bit about my journey with Tarun actually. So one of the main things we find is that, especially working with small scale farmers, they don't have access to basic processing things. So we work with some farmers in Assam, and I am trying to get 4-5 varieties of rice to Mumbai currently. So the first thing is lockdown, which is a big challenge for me. The second thing is the rain. So when you make rice from paddy to the normal rice, right, you have to first you have to process it and then dry it. And when you actually, there's no way you can dry it when it's raining, right, after processing it. And since it's raining so much, they don't have small scale basic processing units to actually process it, right? So these are actual challenges which we face. And what happened was that the women farmers who were working, the small scale women farmers who were cleaning the rice in Gwalpara and Assam, they got cataract and they were manually cleaning the stones. And there's hardly any electricity in the village. So we can't even put like a stone destoning machine, right? And there's no manual destoning or a smart machine which the women can use. So although we would really like to market some of the farmers' products and their rice, it's a challenge to even to start working with them, processing it, and then I get phone calls, there's no electricity, we can't actually process it. So in the start, when we started working with black rice, some of the varieties of Assam, Joha, Bora, all these. So we used to pick up only 100 to 200 kilos, which is not too much. Now we pick up a big amount. So they used to load it on their village jeep, then transfer it to a bolero. Bolero used to go to a truck, and the truck used to come to Turbe and Vashi, and then we used to go and pick it up from there. So this is a kind of supply chain which is so difficult to get products from small scale farmers.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So if you, and it can be anything. Like we tried and we really failed. We tried to work with a group in Madurai with millets. Like we tried to do, ragi atta in bulk from them because they have a very nice variety of ragi atta. But we found that when the ragi actually came to us, there were a lot of stones and there was a lot of straw in it. And we told them, please clean it and give it. But it didn't work. We had to sit down and clean it in any case in our office, So it's like a lot of labor just because there are no small scale processing centers. There's no training. There is no access to small things like electricity. Even if a basic machine for dehusking, a small machine for destoning, because the industry has very much been focusing on 1 ton an hour, 2 tons an hour, right? So they have actually ignored small scale farmers and the back end of it.
And they've done it, and you've obviously done 1 ton and 2 tons because you're looking at commercial varieties that produce that much, and therefore you can send those quantities to the big urban cities, and therefore it makes, for this small quantity, it doesn't make sense to kind of create the machines. Is that the argument?
No, actually it would, because like we used to work with a quinoa farmer in Madhya Pradesh, okay?
Right.
If there was a small machine for destoning for him, I'll, just giving an example, it would very much work for him, because we used to, in the start, pick up just 20, 30 kilos of quinoa.
Right.
At least if nobody is buying off his entire lot, because he's anyways, his production is what, 2 quintals, 200 kilos,
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
he anyways has to sell it to some kind of person, right?
Right.
So
Right.
he's going to sell it off to, say, someone in the middle, the middleman. The middleman is
Right.
going to give him peanuts for 200 kilos. If he has to connect to market directly in the city, he needs to bring it up to a certain processed good, right?
Right. Right.
For that, those machines are very important, which should be on the farm level.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, is there any help from the government or any kind of support at all in terms of reaching out to these farmers, or are they also, is their goal also the same, the big farmers and the commercial crops, is that is where their interest is?
So one of the things, in fact, I was also on a science policy panel, and I had given them the recommendation that they need to create a catalog which is crop wise, supply chain wise, for different regions of the country, because there is enough technology, but the technology is all in the cupboards of IIT, it's in the cupboards of ICARs, agriculture universities. Literally, there's no access to any of this. And also, yeah, I'm giving you an honest answer. Like, I wanted to get pepper, and we are still buying pepper from some of these self-help groups in Assam and also in Kerala, right? They are manually cleaning pepper. I mean, what a waste of time.
Yeah.
Literally. Because why? Because we pick up 30 kilos from them. Beautiful pepper, beautiful black pepper, but cleaned manually. So I try to buy a pepper threshing machine which will clean the pepper, but it's all on the catalog. There's no manufacturing of it. So these are some of the issues which, but anyways, is, the beauty of this entire thing is that many food startups have come up, many agriculture entrepreneurs have come up. So I think it's labor of love at the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'll just finish. Just by the fact that we are working with one group, they get uplifted. And we are able to figure out a way to bring them to a level where we can then buy, say, a bigger machine.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, are there any books which talk about the history of the produce in India? I mean, you talked about cataloging stuff right now. Is there any catalogs of any of these ancient grains or ancient, pulses and vegetables, anywhere that one can really refer to?
See, one of the most beautiful things is that we have Ayurveda and also Krishi Chakra. Okay.
Right.
So these are two almanacs which Vriksha Ayurveda as well. So these are 3-4 things. In fact, I would not call myself an expert on this.
And I think that's why Poonam is helping you out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to ask her to speak on this. So, Vriksha Ayurveda, scriptures basically, yes. So, I would say that is, and also like I would say in Ayurveda there are parts of, say, ingredients and even health, and in Krishi Chakra we have a lot of biofertilizers and even ways of actually safeguarding and what do you call it? Storing seeds. We actually teach kitchen gardening, right? And we teach these biofertilizers, and we also take a lot of farming classes for natural farming and for farmers. And in that we teach things like Jivamrut and all these biofertilizers, which is with cow urine and cow dung. I'll just give it to you. I'll just pass. Desi cow urine and desi cow dung. So these are the things which are actually part of the scriptures, which it's a huge wealth. So one second, I'm going to include my mother. She's going to tell you a little bit about these. This is my mother.
Hi, Poonam.
Hi. So, there is all these, Sushrut Samhita and Charak Samhita, they have references to all these things. Besides Ayurveda, then there is one Vagbhat. तो वाघभट जी का जो रेफरेंसेस है ना, उसमें you get a lot of reference to these old seeds, indigenous seeds. The thing is that currently there are many books, like many people have written books on indigenous wealth. But the point is that we do need to go back and decode the older books in English. That is what. So there are, even Dikshit ji the na, what was Rajiv Dikshit? Rajiv Dikshit. He had made many reference to various old books where we find a lot of records. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Mool Acharya. I'm sharing that there are many of these seed keepers these days. Various seed keepers हैं, वो विपिन जरदारी हैं, मेहुल आचार्य हैं, तो ये लोग they take a lot from Vagbhat ji. And then so just an idea from
sure. Okay. Ruchi, what has been the response, the market response to what you're doing? You're supplying largely to restaurants right now, is that correct?
Yes, so now after COVID, since restaurants have shut, not all of them, but we have changed. We have now started focusing on B2C a lot, and we've started a home delivery service pan-India. So we have an e-commerce portal, tarunaturals.com, and we have also launched on Amazon, Amazon and various other channels. In fact, one of the things with COVID, we realized that we started taking a lot of classes, online classes, especially with kitchen gardening, health, and all these things, to pass on the knowledge on how to use these ancient ingredients. And it's been a really good response, especially with our bakery line. A lot of people are baking. So many people didn't realize that, they could bake with buckwheat flour, amaranth flour, some of these millet flours. So,
right.
We've been doing a lot of innovation with our premixes.
Wow, that's really nice. Okay, and you got premixes for these are like just for baking or for different kind of things. I mean, like, do you have something for lentils, for instance? Like, you have like a premix for dals?
Yeah, so we have a moong dal chila premix. Then we have a 5-grain and a 7-grain chila premix, an ancient grain chila premix. Then we have buckwheat pancake mixes. So we have all these pancake mixes. Then we've started an ancient grain muesli premix as well. So the idea is to use these ancient grains to actually rebrand it into products, essentially. And not only then we have a turmeric latte, which has actually been, it's an immunity tea, and it's been made by my mother, Dr. Poonam Jain. And that's been like a fabulous thing to take during COVID times, because it's got all the lovely spices. Then we've started some kashayams as well, some Ayurvedic teas. So for immunity. So currently with our rebranding process, we're going to relaunch again. But till then, we still have our e-commerce website is still ongoing, and we're doing home delivery pan-India. And even we're also exploring some international markets now, essentially. Yeah, because this is the way to go.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, this is the future. But I just want to go back to pre-COVID. Was there any takeoff from restaurants? Were restaurants picking up stuff? Were they interested at all in what you were doing?
Yeah, in fact, we were working with around 70 restaurants across India. And I would say it was wonderful to work with many chefs, We had many chefs on board who were buying from us. In fact, I see Karthikeya, she's also on the session. So we were working with Perth and different people. We were working with Kitchen Garden. We're still working with many of the restaurants. It's not like we've completely stopped working with them, but it's very limited, I would say. And it was great. Like, we still have 250 SKUs, which means heirloom rices, grains, all kinds of grains, seeds, and really unknown fruits and vegetables, dried. We were doing kaji lemons from Assam. Stuff, you know. Yeah.
No, you gave me a lovely batch of mahua flowers, of candied mahua flowers, which was absolutely fabulous, and I'd never seen that before. And I think these are great things that for bakery, for instance, I think it would go so well.
Yes. And some of the things, and what I found really good was that before COVID, a lot of the chefs were they were brand ambassadors of ingredients. So they were doing a lot of innovation. So I just hope the whole restaurant scene picks up again, because the whole farm to table thing was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think now it's going to be farm to the home table more than
more than before. Now, we don't have a choice. Home delivery is the way to go.
No, absolutely, and that's a great market that I think is untapped, and I think a lot of people don't realize it. A lot of people have been talking, and there's been a lot of movement around this campaign called "Go Vocal for Local." I'm sure that you've heard of it. Do you see any interest in consumers today to actually pick up and to break out of the patterns of conventional buying stuff from the dried foods from markets?
Yeah, so I think one of the things which has really come out of COVID is the aspect of health, right? And suddenly we see that many people want to go local and go healthy as well. So they're asking for a lot of information, which means a lot of the information didn't come their way. I feel the consciousness of the world has risen to a point where we can finally now create a big scale for these forgotten ingredients. So, which is great. Yeah, which is great. And in Maharashtra itself, like, for example, we have little millet and bari, right? And that's a staple diet for most of the tribals across Maharashtra. And tarota coffee. Tarota is a takla bhaji. So the seeds of that, if you actually roast it, it makes beautiful coffee. So it's like a decaf coffee, right? And it's a local drink of the tribal.
Oh, interesting.
It also tastes like decaf Arabica, essentially. So, so you can have different. There's a really big potential of utilizing these local grains and local customs to actually make products. So not only products, but also consume them. And you can make a really beautiful sourdough bread and use a desi wheat, for example. So, sorry about the phone. Yeah. So essentially, you can use millet flour and make a gluten-free bread, and you can become a home baker and use those grains which are locally sourced.
Right. But is there any danger right now? I know it's very early stages, but what happened with quinoa, for instance, in Peru, where suddenly it became a global trend, and then the people who actually were eating it had no access to it. I mean, I think we're fairly far away from it, but is there anything that you're doing to ensure that it doesn't happen to local producers?
I fear for this with forest vegetables. So that's basically why I haven't touched that area of marketing forest vegetables.
We've lost your sound.
So forest produce. Forest produce is basically forest vegetables like shiveli and all these kind of leaves. Berries, berries, karonda. So I think like just because there's no safeguarding techniques from the community, especially for agroforestry and those things. Just shut the door. Sorry. Yeah. So unless and until we don't actually safeguard these things at a community level, we can't really start marketing it. And that's basically why we don't choose to work with a few of the produce only because we are not sure about giving back to the community and making sure it's safeguarded. So that is one thing. The second thing is there's very big danger, especially with Ayurvedic herbs in the Himalayas, Uttarakhand, and also it's highly, I would say, already you have a lot of MNCs who take advantage of this information, and it's exported at peanuts, But there's also very big potential to stop people from migrating to the cities in certain sense. Especially with Uttarakhand. Now, in Uttarakhand, you will find so many ghost villages. So, if you want to stop that migration, and also it's flooding all the time, there's calamities, all those things. So, in places like that, which are really inaccessible, it's great to have like a livelihood, supply chain, marketing back end. So, yeah, I think like there's a lot of work to do in that aspect. And there are also laws like biodiversity laws, which one has to apply for, which actually people don't know about. Like I came to know that if I had to work with a certain community with Mahua, I had to get a biodiversity license. So I stopped working with Mahua.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But there's a way around working with it, right? If you want to create a supply chain, you just have to make sure you're doing compliance. And if you do compliance right, I think sky is the limit. So there's always a way to go about it. Yeah.
Okay. So as a consumer, let's say I am interested and, I want to try different products and produce or whatever it is. I know that it exists, but I don't know what to look for because many of these names are not familiar to me. These varieties, I mean, I didn't know that even though there are 10,000 varieties of rice. Is there any resource where, as a layperson, you can go and say that, okay, this is a good starting place for me to look at stuff and to learn about what actually we were producing in India or we are producing in India, or what is accessible also to me?
So I think ICAR has a directory and the plant varieties website. They have a directory online. I think they do. I'm not sure whether it's accessible to layman. I'll find out and let you know.
Okay.
Because I myself was not successful in getting it because you have to apply officially and receive it. And the government of India also has a seed bank. Like there's a National Seed Association. So they have the seed material of all the surviving seed, the seed varieties in India. But given that, even if you just write varieties of rice, heirloom rice in India, you will get a lot of good articles. CSC has a great down-to-earth. CSC has some really good resources on different rice varieties. Our website, we ourselves do around 20-30 varieties of rice. And then Sri Sri Agriculture Trust, they have a really big seed bank of different varieties of seeds. And my mentor, Dr. Prabhakar Rao, he's a seed keeper. He himself does around 500 varieties of fruits and vegetables. Haryali seeds, you can check that out as well.
No, but apart from seeds, from the actual produce, I mean, that seed is, how do we know, say that there is a certain, say, let's say, kapli atta, like, a very, very simple example, or something else of that sort. How do I find out, like, who's supplying it? Where will I buy, where can I buy it from, etc.? Is there any resource of that kind?
So kapli atta you can find on our website, tarunnaturals.com. And we have around 4 varieties of wheat which we sell. We sell durum, pegambri, kapli, and spelt. We basically, and we have an all-purpose flour as well. So we sell around 5 varieties of wheat. But there's a lot of varieties of wheat in the pipeline. Yeah, so actually, I don't think there is a certain database of ICAR would be a good place to actually go and do research. But they mostly have hybrid varieties as that thing. They don't necessarily have the
So there's no
They
real
do.
directory of producers in India, like an organic or like, locally sourced
Yes.
directory that one can kind of look at.
I think APEDA website, APEDA, APEDA
Yeah,
government
but
website,
that's
you
more
will
for
find,
export, isn't it?
yeah. You could look at the BioFac website as well. They would have a lot of the producers on that as well. But when it comes to really indigenous ingredients like
Hmm.
Sonamoti wheat, Pegamri wheat, Khapli wheat, I don't think you'll find any of these desi varieties of crops in one database. That in fact
Okay.
that should be a thing we should take up, Anton. You
Yeah,
know,
that's a great idea. Yeah.
yeah, we should take that up.
And rice.
And yeah, so rice and all the millets could be part of it. And one of the things, in fact, I had an argument with a professor once from ICR. I was like, why don't you do more research on indigenous varieties of different crops? So
Right.
unfortunately, there's not much money and there's not enough research grant and
Hmm.
also
Hmm.
interest at the scientific level to take research up. So
Right.
that's also, yeah. So now with the
Okay.
consumer awareness, I think it's coming back.
Well, that's a good thing, and I think as consumers, the greater variety that we have, the greater choice that we actually have with our food, the better is our diet will be. So, Ruchi, thank you so much for
Thank you.
taking time out and for letting us know about all the varieties of, I mean, some of the varieties that are there in India, and give us just a sense of that there is so much more that we
Yes,
had and that is there than what we are familiar with. So,
right.
thank you,
Thank
Poonam,
you so much.
as well,
Yeah.
and
Thank
thank you everyone
you.
for listening in.